On this episode of LAOFCS Weekly, we will have Robert Redford's final movie, ? And we will be talking about Best Supporting Actress at the Academy Awards. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
So I'm so excited this week to be back, mainly because it's not just me this week, because last week you guys got treated to 50 minutes of me rambling on about my favorite movies at the Toronto International Film Festival. But today I have a full panel of people. First, my introduction is I am Scott Menzel, the founder of this wonderful organization. And this organization would not be so wonderful if it wasn't for some of the people that are sitting beside me. So I'm going to turn it over to them. First up is Katie.
Hi, I'm Katherine Kilkenny. I'm a writer and editor at The Hollywood Reporter and a contributing writer at Pacific Standard magazine.
I'm David Bax. I am co-host of the podcast and co-editor of the website Battleship, Pretension.
Hi, I'm Abbie Bernstein. I'm a staff writer with Assignment X. I write books about movies for Titan Publishing. And if you're watching us instead of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings, I congratulate you on taking care of your mental health.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this week. We are back to our normal format. I know the show was a little wonky the last couple of weeks because I was at a bunch of film festivals and we kind of did some shows remotely and the formatting was all over the place. And then in between there, we had an episode where Kit, Nestor, and Jimmy came on board and they did a special episode where they just talked about the movies this week, that week, I should say. So the formatting of the show basically goes as follows. We start off with the movie pick of the week. Once again, what that is our members. We have a private Facebook page that nobody besides us can see. We vote on which movie we're going to pick for the movie pick of the week. Go figure. And then following with that, we're going to talk about Indie Spotlight, which is something that we love to do here. We're, especially this panel here today, we love focusing on independent films and supporting independent cinema. And what we do is we pick either a movie that's new, it could be on streaming, it could be brand new to like Blu-ray, and we highlight it and talk a little bit about it and give you reasons to see it. That is followed by Retro Rewind, which is an older film that is available on either a streaming service, on Blu-ray, somewhere you can find it. And then lastly, we have a special topic. Now, we have officially begun award season. Some of us at this table have been to a couple film festivals already. It is in full gear. So from this week moving forward, probably until the middle or end of January, we are going to have predictions for various categories at the Oscars. This week, we're going to start off with Best Supporting Actress. So I'm going to shut up for a little bit. But before I do, I want to announce the movie pick of the week. This was a pretty big week for movies. I feel like we had Night School, we had Hellfest. What's some other ones that I'm forgetting?
Monsters and Men.
Monsters and Men, the one I saw.
There was also The Old Man and the Gun, and there's a couple other films which, the studios, both big studios and smaller PR companies really need to let up on these 20 titles a week. I feel like it's nearly impossible for everyone to see them, and some of these movies are really great. But with that being said, our official movie pick of the week, and it came in by pretty much a landslide, I feel, is The Old Man and the Gun, which is the new film from David Lowery. Katie, I believe you saw this at the Telluride Film Festival. Care to tell a little bit about the plot and your feelings?
Yeah, so just to summarize, The Old Man and the Gun is based off of a New Yorker story by David Gran. And it's about a 70-something, 80-something guy, an elderly man who has been robbing banks his entire life and has gotten out of prison, I think 17 times. I could be wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of his life's passion. And so this guy who's played by Robert Redford ultimately goes on his final crime spree of his life. So that is sort of impeded, but also made more interesting by the fact that he starts a relationship with a woman named Jewel, played by Sissy Spacek, who's incredible in this role, in the movie. And so at the same time, there's a police officer in Texas, played by Casey Affleck, who is sort of hunting him down and is perpetually deceived by him. And so there's this kind of cat and mouse game being played, but it really feels like it's a sort of benevolent cat and mouse game. Like one thing I found really interesting about this movie is that the titular robber, never pulls a gun, which is so interesting. And Robert Redford really uses his charm and just words to get people to shell out, basically. And it's just a really interesting sort of old-fashioned movie about a criminal who's kind of lovable as well. That's what I found. What did you think, Scott?
Yeah, no, we got to see this. It was our first screening at Telluride.
Yeah.
It was a surprise press screening. And I was very excited for this one. I love David Lowery. I think the man has made so many different types of movies, from, Pete's Dragon to Ain't Them Body Saints to Ghost Story. Every one of his films is so different than the next, and he's such a visionary in his own way. Very art housey, but at the same time really knows how to develop characters and bring them to life. And man, when I was watching this movie, it was like watching Robert Redford and constantly reminding me why he's such an icon in this industry and why he's such a legend, because he's so damn charismatic. And like you pointed out, the chemistry between him and Sissy Spacek, just incredible. I did also like Casey Affleck in the film. He has a little bit of a smaller role, but I love the back and forth between those two and some of the phone calls that happen with them. It might have been debunked. It might not be, but this is supposed to be his last film, and Robert Redford's last film. And I think you couldn't ask for a better movie to end on if it really was. It's not a film that I would say it's not a meaty film. It's a very simplistic story, but at the same time, it's a character-driven film. And like you pointed out, it showcases how someone can kind of use their charm and their wisdom to kind of like get one up on people. And I just really had a great time with it. I really did.
Yeah, it is interesting. You say it's not as much of a meaty film. I came in to the theater really not knowing what to expect, because this is David Lowery, and we've all seen like A Ghost Story, Ain't Them Body Saints, but he's also done Pete's Dragon, and this felt very much more in the Pete's Dragon mold. It felt like a awardsy movie that a lot of people are going to go to and enjoy themselves at. It's not particularly challenging. This is Robert Redford in a role that doesn't really ask much of him. It's not a showy performance. It's just very much Robert Redford showing his charm. He's not crying in any part of the movie. It's not like a clear awards play, which is very interesting. So that was fascinating to me, just to think about David Lowery and where he thinks his career is going, because he's just coming off of A Ghost Story, which was so different.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you think about A Ghost Story, like it was sort of targeting a totally different audience. I feel like a lot of young people went to A Ghost Story, and The Old Man and the Gun feels like it's more of a older audience that it's going for, and people who really love Robert Redford. So across the gamut there.
I also think, this film is one of those rare films that actually looks like it was shot in the time period. There's so many movies that we see where people are like, one of the big issues that I had about last week's movie pick of the week, The Brother Sisters, was that, or Sisters, Brothers, whatever it's called, was that film, I never felt like it was in Oregon in 1851. Like that movie looked like it was shot, in Colorado today, and everyone was playing dress up. But this one, like the way that it was shot, and it was shot on film, it just felt so natural. It felt like an homage and a celebration, not only to those old kind of like the old school robber type movies, cops and robbers movies, but just played to those who love cinema and love that retro type feel that I just feel like we don't get that much of anymore. So, do you have any predictions, Katie, in terms of this for award season? You think it has any potential of getting any awards?
That's a tough one. I think that Robert Redford could potentially get a nomination because it is his last film. But again, as I said, it's not a particularly Oscar-y performance. I think cinematography could do well because it was shot on 60 millimeter. And it's beautiful. Sissy Spacek is wonderful, but the supporting actress race is so crowded this year. I just don't think it's going to happen. What do you think?
I think it's Robert Redford. It's like a gimme kind of thing. It's like, we haven't given him anything. Should we give him something? Do we know that this is his last performance? I think that's also, in a weird way, I kind of feel like maybe shoots him in the foot, because if he does decide to retire, he may go down with not getting one. It's very strange to keep talking about this, but I feel like we've always talked about actors. I mean, cinematographer last year, Roger Deakins. How long did it take him to finally get one? And Robert Redford, you kind of like look at his filmography and you're kind of wondering, like, really? And then you kind of said, like, I'm with you. Like, it's like, I don't know if I would give him one for this movie. Like, yes, it's a nice, beautiful swan song, but like at the same time, it's like, it's not Robert Redford doing the best Robert Redford. It's just him being Robert Redford and charming. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, but that's the only category that I think it would get nominated for.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
So we do a rating system out of 10. What would you give it?
6.5, okay. 7.
I give it a 7.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to shift gears. We're going to go into Indie Spotlight. And Abbie, we will start with you for this.
Okay, so this week, Hellfest came out, which I feel is a very fun throwback to the kind of horror you got in the late 70s, early 80s, where you've got a bunch of young people being terrorized by a mass killer. And the big fun of the movie is the mood, which is completely uncynical. It's like they haven't done this before. The characters do have some pop culture knowledge, but it's not like Scream, where that's the whole thrust of it. And the production design is just off the charts. It's I think the guy's name is Michael Perry, the production designer. And it just throws in the kitchen sink of invention of everything you could ever want at a horror-themed amusement park, from very subtle stuff to giant, two human length height creations wandering around like giant whatevers. So I think that's all great. And I'm also like a huge fan of Bex Taylor Klaus, who's one of the main actors, and she's just exuberant and wonderful.
Yeah. I also saw the film, and we were talking about this a little bit off air. I had a great time with it. It was the first movie that I got to see coming back from Toronto. So I said this in one of my interviews, was that I enjoyed the hell out of this movie because of the fact that I was watching depressing movie after depressing movie after depressing movie, that I just wanted something that was just big, dumb fun. But you touched upon something that we didn't talk about off air, was the production design. And this movie, for a very low budget movie, I think it was about $5 million or less. The costume design, the mazes, the design of the mazes, and the fact that they actually shut down Six Flags for a couple of days to film there, and they do their own thing. And normally I don't do shout-outs, but the Six Flags here, Magic Mountain in California, they actually have a recreation of the one that's in the movie. And I got to walk through it when I did the press day, and it's really well done. It's kind of horrifying. Me and a couple other members from this organization got to do it, and it was just a fantastic time. What I loved about Hellfest was I love the mystery behind it. It does feel like a nod to the 70s and the 80s thrillers and horror slasher movies. But at the same time, like, it doesn't take itself... I didn't think the movie took itself too seriously. I thought it had fun, and there was so much mystery to this character, and this is like a random person walking off the street and terrorizing this park.
Now, I did have some consistency problems, as we were discussing before. How to discuss this in a non-spoilery fashion.
Oh, yeah.
There is a scene fairly early on between the main protagonist and the killer where something happens.
Yes.
And I think that's
well done. That's well done. Very good.
Not spoilery.
Yes.
It seems like our main character should have a realization and reaction to what has happened once she understands what's going on. That never comes. There's also the killer seems to change his MO and his feelings about secrecy on a dime. There is a scene where we lose two main characters that is so confusingly staged that I only realized we'd lost them when they weren't in the next. I was like, oh, okay, I guess they're dead. And also, even though you don't expect huge depth from the characters, our characters, charming though they were, had like almost no backstory.
I agree.
Which I understand can be a convention of the genre, but I felt that they really went for that a little much. Now, I did love, and again, how not to be spoilery, there were some gags that were very clever as to, is this part of it, is this not part of it?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think I get what you were saying about it with the character development, but that's something that I really enjoyed about the movie. I felt like everyone in the film kind of had this mystery about them, including who the mass killer was, which was a ballsy thing to happen at the end of the movie. Again, no spoilers. It kind of pulls back, and you get to see this person walk into their home, and you get one kind of shock, and then you go into the other shock, and it just worked. And I kind of see this maybe with a little bit more money becoming a franchise. Can you see that?
Oh, absolutely, I can see that, and I don't think they need more money, and they can just have the. Well, I guess that's a little spoilery too. They could very easily just say that it's somewhere else, but that this is a really nice design for a horror maze, and they keep. I can see them even using the same general production design. So yes, I can definitely see this being a franchise. And I don't know that they need more money. They seem to have done perfectly fine right. with the budget they had.
Just a tighter script, maybe, right? Just a little bit tighter.
A script with a little more cause and effect, I think. By the way, this should not be confused with Bloodfest, which came out several weeks ago, which also takes place at a horror maze, although it's a very different plot.
Okay. What would you give it out of 10?
6.5.
Okay, sounds fair. I actually gave it an 8. Again, it could be because I was just so burnt out of serious movies. I just really enjoyed it.
I love the production design. I had a good time. It would not have cost them any more money to take care of those structural issues.
I can agree with that. All right, David, what do you got for us? What's your indie pick?
I want to highlight a movie that's available on Hulu. It was actually, I think, picked up by Hulu at Sundance this year and has been available to stream on Hulu for about a month or a little more. It's a documentary called Minding the Gap. And it's the director is from Rockford, Illinois, outside of Chicago, home of Cheap Trick. That's not a part of the movie. I just can't mention Rockford, Illinois without mentioning that it's the home of Cheap Trick. And he grew up as a skateboard kid and then went on to be a filmmaker. And he goes back to Rockford and sort of finds the next generation of these like high school or just out of high school skateboard kids who are like him from lower income backgrounds and who find a certain a freedom and joy in skateboarding that they don't get anywhere else in their lives. And the movie is very, very emotional but not it gets to some heavy places that I'll get into, but it doesn't feel heavy. It still has the feeling of like this guy's making a skate video. If you ever watched like skate videos growing up, like they're very kinetic, and so there's a lot of great camera movement and following the skateboarders and seeing the tricks and really getting a feel for this freedom that they feel in skateboarding. And then you get to a place where the filmmaker realizes that skateboarding and being from growing up poor are not the only things he has in common with these kids. That there's a through line of parental physical abuse that they all share, and in some cases are now growing up and are sadly reliving in their own adult relationships, and it becomes very very bittersweet and heavy, and ends up. I don't want to give. I don't want to not give any spoilers. Not that it's Hellfest, but it still goes.
Yeah.
You know, the filmmaker becomes. He brings in his own mother to talk about his own past, and yet what's so beautiful about the movie is that it never, as it gets into this really emotional stuff, it never loses sight of the purity of skateboarding. It's like, still, even when it's a movie about child abuse or spousal abuse, it's also a skateboarding movie. It never forgets to be that. It's a really, really beautiful movie. And yeah, like I said, it's available to stream now.
Okay. Did you see that one, Katie?
No, but
I have not.
I keep on getting recommended
Yeah.
that.
Do they mention at all what the title refers to? Because I know in England, Mind the Gap is don't fall into the hole between the subway platform and the train.
Yeah, and I don't know why they called the movie that. It's honestly, it's when Scott asked me what my point rating is, it's going to get docked half a point for having kind of a dumb title, I think.
So what is your rating?
I'm going to go with 8.5. It would be a 9.
Okay.
Don't love the title.
I could see that. Obviously, that movie has been shared, like you said. I heard a lot about it, but it's amazing, again, how so few have seen it. Mm-hmm. So it's on Hulu, so check it out. Katie, what's your pick?
I had to go with Colette, which is Keira Knightley's latest period piece movie. Amazing costume design, as usual. But I found this one really fascinating, and it totally blew away my expectations because of how modern the story of Colette is. So to briefly summarize, Colette is a French writer who was basically ghostwriting for her husband, Willie, and created some of his most iconic and definitely best-selling novels, the Claudine books, which were about her childhood in rural France. So Claudine at school, Claudine in Paris. And this movie is kind of an origin story where we follow her from when she's 19 and sort of having these illicit meetups with rendezvous with Willie, to when she becomes, till she breaks away from Willie. It's not a spoiler to say that, it's history. And becomes a writer of her own and an actress. And she's a fascinating life. She had so many affairs with so many people, men and women, and just a true original. And I was sort of coming into the movie thinking that they would whitewash her history a little to make it more of a Keira Knightley period piece. But I mean, this I think is the first period piece I've seen with a transgender character who is not the center of the story. It's not about that transgender character. It has a lot to do with the sort of gender as a construct, the fallacy of dressing as a woman. It has a lot to do with writing and the sort of idea that writing is a business as well as an art. It does not shy away, and this I really appreciated as a writer, from how difficult writing is. You know, so many times when we're looking at movies about writers, it's like, oh, they go into this like trance and this beautiful thing comes out. But Colette is literally locked in her room by her husband and told to write for 4 hours at a time. And she shows how difficult it is and how she doesn't want to do it. And that sometimes it transports her. And so I just found it really, it completely exploded my expectations of what it was going to be. It's not perfect. I mean, her life is so rich, you can't possibly compress it into 2.5 hours, but I think it's a great introduction to this author, and hopefully it'll get more people to read her biographies and read her books.
Did you see that one?
I did see Colette. Did you see Colette?
I did not.
I did not. It was one of those movies that was at the festivals, and I kept getting screenings for. And it was always like when I was seeing something else, and I was kind of like, I guess I'll just see it. So I'm going to try to see it either this week or next week. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm a big fan of Keira Knightley, and even with that said, I think this might be her best performance so far. And there's a lot to pick from. I'm a big fan of her in A Dangerous Method and even in the Pirates movies, I have to admit.
Yeah.
At least the first 3, the ones that she's in. And she's in the 5th one, technically. That's a spoiler at this point, but it's been over a year.
It's all right. It's all right.
But Wash Westmoreland, his last film was Still Alice, which he directed with his partner, Richard Glatzer, who has since passed away. In both films, I think, aesthetically, they come at their subject material in a very classical approach. They're not very showy movies, although Colette does have a great deal of awesome costume design and production design. But in terms of the framing and editing, it sort of unfolds the way you expect a sort of prestige movie to unfold. But that's not I don't mean that as a dig at the movie. I think it shows what Westmoreland is interested in, which is performance. That just like how great Julianne Moore was in Still Alice. This is a showcase for Keira Knightley to give I think one of the most electric performances she's given. And I would also say that it might be the best performance of Dominic West's career, but that's coming from me not saying as much because I've never been a huge fan. But I think I think maybe playing a bullshit artist like really kind of plays into Dominic West's hammy tendencies. So I think in both cases might be a career best performance.
He's very good and restrained on The Affair. I will defend Dominic West there.
Okay.
I did not see that one either, as I said. I'm looking forward to seeing it. It has piqued my curiosity, to say the least, just because you guys have really sold this movie, but also it's been in a couple festivals, and I've heard so much about it, and I still can't believe I missed it. Real quick, what would be your rating, Katie?
I would give it a 7.
7?
In agreement, 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to my pick, and I've talked about this on the show last week, so I'll just talk about it briefly. Fahrenheit 11/9, Michael Moore's latest documentary. As Abbie pointed out, going in the news right today, as the show is going on, now is such an important time to watch a movie like Fahrenheit 11/9. And what's really nice about this film, even if you're not a Michael Moore fan, because as I said, he does have his opinions, and I think he speaks to a very specific audience. This was very weird to watch for the simple fact that Moore was just angry this time. He was going after the Democrats, he was going after the liberals, he was going after the Republicans. This is like everyone is just being kicked on the ground, and he's saying, you know what? You didn't do it, you didn't do it, you didn't do it, you failed, you failed, you failed. And he's just showing this world that we live in now and how it has just gotten worse since the George Bush era in a lot of ways. And the things with the shootings and the Flint water crisis and how we rig elections and all these things. And I just think that a lot of what's being said may not be new news to people who are well versed in what's going on in the world. But I still think from seeing this film at Toronto, a lot of people were really surprised by some of this stuff. Like there's a part where the movie looks at Obama and how he went down to Flint, Michigan and pretended to drink water out of a cup, even though he really didn't drink water, because everyone hails him as like, now because we have, the one we don't mention any on the news, the Cheeto. Yeah. No one really mentions the shortcomings of Barack Obama. Everyone kind of gives him a pass, like, Obama was so much better, but Obama was not perfect. People forget that he was also the one who wanted to censor the internet, and that there was all that stuff that happened when he was in office. So, I just wanted to recommend this film because I was kind of sad that this movie didn't do that well at the box office last week. And I was thinking that I didn't expect it to be Fahrenheit 9/11, but I was expecting to at least have like a $15 to $20 million box office return, and it did like 1.5. It did really small.
Don't you think people are maybe in pain from the news?
That's what it is. Yeah.
It's sort of like, and by the way, I was being facetious at the beginning of this. I do think we should pay great attention to the news, but I understand that sometimes you need a break. But there is a point at which I think people are just like,
I'm burnt out.
I need to go to sleep, or I need, it's just very hard to take, because for most of us, this is a stream of terrible, terrible news. And I can see where people would go, if I'm going to pay $14 to do something, it's not going to be more news.
Right. And I think Scott Menzel pointed this out on another podcast that I did last week, was, when Michael Moore first kind of came out and his movies always have a track record of doing fairly well. The last couple, like, they did okay, but they weren't as successful as his other films. And it was also in the age where social media wasn't an everyday thing. Like when Fahrenheit 9/11 came out, social media was really just in its heyday at that point. So, yes, we knew that was Bush bashing and whatnot, but people were like really angry and upset. Now it's like it's so noisy on the news and social media that you just cannot step away from this. Like, I'm sure once the show ends and I open Twitter, there's going to be something going to happen between Donald Trump and something. And, I think that's to your point. I think people are not going to shell out money to be depressed and watch something that they can get for free anymore.
And I also think that Michael Moore, when he started, was a very particular voice. Now he's still a very distinctive voice, but there are many other people also in that position. He's not as unique.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You just turn on like Vice News, like on HBO, and that kind of gonzo journalism, video journalism is totally on display. And I do wonder if this will have a better life on streaming as people are like, okay, I'm in bed, I can take this tonight. But yeah, to go out to the movie theater and relive some of the worst things that have happened in our culture in the past few years, it is a tough sell, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Did anyone else see this?
I did see it.
Yeah, what did you think?
I found it. One thing that surprised me at a Michael Moore movie is that I was crying at the end of it because it ends with the Parkland kids stuff in a way that's very inspirational. So all this litany of 2 hours of dragging us through the stuff we already lived through does kind of come to a point where he's saying that sitting on our hands and hoping isn't going to help. And it's in a particular dig at Barack Obama in the hope sort of campaign. He's spurring you to action. And so he ends with the Parkland, Emma Gonzalez and David Hoggan and those kids. And it's very inspiring and very emotional. I did actually had to go to the bathroom and wash my face after the movie. I do think it's a little overlong given how heavy it is.
It lacks focus, right, this time?
Yeah, I mean, eventually I think he does pull, because it does seem like, why is so much of this about Flint? This is supposed to be about how we got Donald Trump. But I think he does kind of pull it into making Flint sort of represent either Trump voters or the many minority voters who stayed home because they weren't campaigned to, weren't spoken to, weren't addressed. So he does eventually pull it in, but it does kind of feel like it's all over the place. I do think, to Katie's point, the fact that you see this kind of stuff all the time now, some of his stunts, I was kind of like, this movie's almost 2 hours long. Do we need the part where he fills the truck full of Flint water and waters the governor's lawn? It's that's when you did that on TV Nation 25 years ago, that seemed like something cool. But you see that kind of stuff all the time now. The movie could have been 105 minutes instead of 110 minutes, and we didn't have to see that stuff. But I do think I hope people do see it eventually, because it is inspiring.
Yeah. I would give it an 8 out of 10. What would you give it?
Probably not that, maybe a 6.5, 6.5.
Okay, sounds good. All right, now moving into Retro Rewind, we're going to do this one a little bit quicker just because we want to make sure we have time for the Best Supporting Actress talk. Let's see, David, we can start with you.
Okay, I wanted to highlight a movie that, so I've been, because I'm, trying to be a total, woke bro, I've been trying to, in 2018, do the 52 films by women thing, where at the end of September I've seen 44 so far. I think I'll make it. But one of the things I did about a little more than a month ago, the American Cinematheque at the Egyptian Theater did a night of films by Lois Weber, who is a silent film director who made some really, some stuff that we don't think of when we think of silent film. She made a movie about abortion called Where Are My Children, and the one I wanted to highlight because it's available to stream is called Hypocrites, which is from 1915 and was hugely controversial at the time. The movie's it's an hour and 15-minute long what's the word I'm looking for, homily. It's less of a story than it is just her making points about how hypocritical we can be, and the way she illustrates the point is by having it starts in the medieval in the Middle Ages, and a monk creates a statue of Truth, and Truth is a naked woman, and it's a scandal, and he's killed, and then so the rest of the movie has a personification of this statue in double exposure or showing up in all these different situations. This is a movie from 1915 that for 3/4 of the movie there's a naked woman walking around. It was hugely controversial at the time, which I think sort of feeds into her exact point that she's making about the stuff that we're hypocritical about. But it's full of all kinds of really cool uses of tinting and, like I said, double exposure. There's a lot of technique on display and some really beautiful imagery, and she does things where she does a cool thing where the actors who are in the medieval sort of prologue part show up as different characters, so they represent a type. This is the hypocritical priest, and he's going to play a hypocritical priest 300 years later too. It's really cool. It's also, like I said, it's only an hour and 15 minutes or so, if that. It might not even be that. But another reason that I wanted to highlight it is because I wanted to talk about the streaming service it's on, which is called Canopy, which if you have a library card, you get Canopy for free. And there's thousands of classic films and foreign films and silent films and independent films, including the entire Frederick Wiseman library. Every Frederick Wiseman, I don't think Monrovia, Indiana is on there yet, but everything that he's ever made, you can watch on Canopy, and you can do it for free if you have a library card. That's so cool. And that's where you can find hypocrites.
How about you, Katie?
That's amazing. You just reminded me. I keep on meaning to get Canopy, and I haven't. So my recommendation this week is if you, like me, missed Wiener when it first came out, it is streaming on Hulu. It is amazing. It's particularly interesting to watch now, I think. I watched it recently. If you're kind of sick of 2018, but you still want to learn some stuff, it's a really incredible, I want to say unprecedented look behind the scenes at the spin machine when a politician is dealing with a crisis of sexual misconduct. The directors, Josh Kriegman and Elise Steinberg, I think I'm probably messing that up, one of them actually worked for the Anthony Weiner campaign. So they had this incredible access to his attempt at a comeback, basically, after he left the Senate. And the story starts off kind of as this is his return, this is how he's going to spin things, and it becomes something totally different when the next cache of photos comes out and there's another scandal. So it's, as a journalist, it makes you really jealous because it's like, oh my God, he thinks he's going to have this one story, and then it becomes this other story. It's kind of like Icarus in that way. The movie changes. And you're left with this incredible montage of scenes and quotes. I mean, Anthony Weiner himself is a very charismatic guy, very candid. And then you've got Huma Abedin, his wife, who is just this cipher, who's just endlessly fascinating. And then this sort of legion of young people who are getting more and more dispirited as the campaign goes on. But as one of them said, they're all trying to get on Hillary's campaign anyway. At the time, they were trying to sort of pal up to Huma Abedin. You see what's going on with his PR campaign, how they're trying to spin it as things get increasingly worse. You see how he's trying to make the most of it, and he's still in the midst of all this, has some really rousing speeches about the middle class in New York. He still clearly loves his job, but he also just cannot help himself. It is just so fun. It's sort of tragicomic, and it's also a really fascinating look behind the scenes, so I would highly recommend.
Sounds good. Abbie?
Nicholas Meyer is probably best known for his work with the Star Trek movies, but he wrote and directed a movie called Time After Time in 1979, which is based on a book by Carl Alexander. Totally charming. The premise is that H.G. Wells, who is really an idealist, does invent the time machine, which is stolen by his best friend, who he finds out is unfortunately Jack the Ripper. So H.G. pursues Jack the Ripper to 1979, then the present San Francisco. And it's, of all things, a romance, because H.G. Wells falls in love with Mary Steenburgen in the present. In fact, Malcolm McDowell and Mary Steenburgen really did fall in love and get married during the movie, and so the chemistry between them is extraordinary. David Warner plays Jack the Ripper and has one of the most wonderful speeches I've ever heard, which is, "Oh no, my mother was rather an atrocious woman in her way, but her many failings did not include raising mentally deficient sons." I mean, and this movie is not as well known as it should be. It's it's one of my favorites because it's just kind of got everything, and it's got this wonderful assurance, and it's got Malcolm McDowell getting to deploy charm in a non-sinister way for once, and David Warner bringing a lot of pathos to Jack the Ripper. And it's got Mary Steenburgen and her sort of like, she'd done Missouri Breaks before, but this is where she really completely blooms. And it's just wonderful.
Great. Where can is that on streaming or is it on DVD?
It's on DVD. I'm pretty sure it's on Blu-ray, and I'm sure it's streaming
somewhere. Okay. That sounds fascinating. Until you mentioned, I never heard of it.
Well,
so
that
there you
was.
Go.
I felt it was my duty to mention it.
And that's the reason why we do some of these things on here, is to kind of point out movies that people probably missed. Not the movie that I'm going to mention, of course, because I'm sure everyone knows this movie, which is American Psycho, which is making its way to Blu-ray 4K this week. I think this is the first movie. I know most people are like, well, I connected Christian Bale with Newsies. No, I connected Christian Bale with American Psycho. And this movie is very iconic in many different ways, not only because of the killings that feature Phil Collins songs, as well as a business card scene, but also how explicit this movie is sexually. This movie was directed, I think, Mary Harmon, right?
Mary Harron.
Yeah, and it was very controversial at the time that it was released. I know I went to see it at a point where I probably should not have seen this movie. I believe I snuck into the theater to see it. I will openly admit that now on the show. And this is still one of those movies that is just, I don't think Christian Bale has given a better performance yet in his career. It's wild, it's crazy, it's so different, and I know it's based off a Bret Easton Ellis novel. But this is one of those movies that, they tried to turn into a stage play, a year ago, right? A musical, and it bombed. And I kind of said, no shit, it's who's gonna go see this? This is a cult movie, and they try to turn it into a Broadway musical. But yeah, this is just a wild film, and I recommend it because it's on 4K this week. All right, so last point of conversation today will be our awards talk, which, as I said, is going to be continuing now into all the episodes until probably the middle of January. And we are going to start off with Best Supporting Actress. Abbie, let's go back to you. Do you have any predictions so far?
I don't have predictions. I have ought-to-be's.
Okay.
If they do what they often do, where a young performer is really the lead, but they put in the supporting category because of youth, I would think Amanda Stenberg for The Hate U Give, and possibly Regina Hall for her mother in The Hate U Give, which is a terrific movie that opens next week. And also Cynthia Erivo for Bad Times at the Yellow Royale, who, as an actress, I'd never heard of before, and she's amazing. So
she's going to be in, or is in Widows as well. She's I think
Yeah.
she's a Broadway actress who's suddenly in a third of the movies that are coming out as well.
How about for you, David?
So I've seen very few of these types of movies, but based on buzz or whatever, some that have stood out to me are Regina King and If Beale Street Could Talk, and Nicole Kidman in Boy Erased. These are things that I've heard. Claire Foy in First Man, maybe, I don't know. I haven't seen any of these movies yet. I think maybe by the time the awards actually start getting announced, this might be a bit of a dark horse. But Michelle Yeoh in Crazy Rich Asians. But I wanted to highlight some that would never ever
Go for
never
it.
ever
Go
get
for it,
nominated.
man.
But
Do
they're
it.
some of my
Do
favorite
it.
supporting actor performance of the year. Noted weirdo Miranda July played it straight as a ill-equipped single mother in Madeline's Madeline. And she, Miranda July is a performance artist, normally does not play it straight, but she's a...
No.
And then in Support the Girls, which is one of my favorite movies of the year so far, the acting debut of Shayna McHale, whom rap fans know better as the rapper Jungle Pussy. I don't know if you guys saw Support the Girls, but she was Danielle.
She's really good.
She's fantastic. Sheila Vand, who starred in a few years ago in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, was another ill-equipped mother and domestic abuse victim in We the Animals. I think one that actually could get some talk if people see it is coming out in a week or two. It's Tamara Jenkins' Private Life, and the young girl in that, Kaylee Carter. I never know with Netflix movies if people are going to see it or it's going to get forgotten.
Right.
But if people watch Private Life, this is a legit contender, I think. She's terrific. You saw it?
Private Life is amazing.
Yeah.
And, no promotion whatsoever by Netflix. I mean, they canceled the press day. I was supposed to do the press day for this, and they canceled it.
Oh, wow.
And I would have loved to talk about that film because I think it's one of Jenkins's. It might be my favorite film of hers.
I definitely think it's my favorite of hers. It was after Madeline, it was my second favorite film that I saw at Sundance this year. So I've been telling people for 7 or 8 months now to look out for it. And it is a bummer that it looks like it's going to get buried. And then I last wanted to mention the cast of Annihilation, which is probably still my favorite big blockbuster release of 2018 so far. You could sort of take your pick at any of the supporting actress roles. I really liked Tuva Novotny, who again, spoilers, is the first one to succumb to be killed off, but whose death sort of hangs over the rest of the movie in a way. Those are some of my favorites that these are never going to be nominated.
Man.
But
that's why I bring you on, so I get some unique perspective here. How about you, Katie?
So I'm going to go with a much more cynical approach. I think it will really depend on what category the studio decides to put Olivia Colman in The Favorite. I think if she's lead, then it's Regina King's year in If Beale Street Could Talk. But if she's supporting, I think it's hers, because this movie, it's interesting in that it starts with Emma Stone's character's perspective, and then it sort of becomes a movie about the Queen, played by Olivia Colman. She has just a towering performance. I don't think there's any other way to put it. She is a woman who is clearly troubled, perhaps mentally ill. It's really hard to tell. Incredibly wounded and also proud. It's just a movie where Olivia Colman, who's about to play the Queen on The Crown, is just like an open box. She's emotionally raw in every way, and can veer from just like delighted and giggly like a little girl to like completely shattered the next. It's an incredible performance, and I think that if she's supporting, she's going to steal that one away. Otherwise, Regina King, I mean, she's just amazing. She's been in everything, and I keep on hearing great things about If Beale Street Could Talk. I haven't seen it yet.
I'm going to be the naysayer on here and say
Really?
that I saw If Beale Street Can Talk. One of our members, Carla Renata, highly recommended the movie to me. I want to thank you for pointing out Regina Hall for Hate You Give, because right now that is one of my favorite movies of the year. It's powerful stuff. Really, I was like on the verge of tears from beginning to end watching that movie. It's really powerful. But going to Regina King, I'm one of the few people that I watched that movie, not at the premiere, but the day afterwards. And while I think the cinematography is great, and I appreciate, the story of Black love and showing the struggles, the topic of the Black struggle in America has been such a big topic this year. We've had movies like Sorry to Bother You, we've had Black Klansman, we had Blind Spotting, Hate You Give. And I've watched all those movies before I watched this one. And even though this one is much more low-key and much more poetic, I just wasn't that blown away by the film. I felt like it was kind of a slow burn. And I will have to say that if I did have anything positive to say about the film outside of the direction and the cinematography, it would be Regina King. But I do feel like I've seen better performances this year. That's all I will say. And I think there's a lot more people that they can pick from the movie. But I know Barry Jenkins, coming off of Moonlight, this is a solid, a second feature, or not a second feature, but a solid follow-up to that one. It didn't connect with me emotionally as much as I wanted to. And there's some parts of the story that are very personal to me and some of the things that go on in my family. But didn't feel that emotional punch that I wanted to feel, which was much different than the Hate You Give. There's talk about Claire Foy in First Man. Katie, did you see First Man?
I did.
Okay, come on. No, I need you to back me up on this. Do you? No way, right?
No. I just, First Man, I think, is like an emotionally vacuous film. But also, I think that with Claire Foy, it is a little bit of an improvement on the concerned wife trope. But she is a concerned wife, and she's great. I mean, but you've got Claire Foy, you shouldn't put her in that role. Like,
right.
Yeah. I don't think there's any way. She's not given enough.
That I know that we're talking about Best Supporting Actress, but I've been dying to talk to someone else about this movie. First Man was I think my biggest disappointment this year. I think it's a technical masterpiece, but everything else just falls so flat in this movie. Every obstacle that goes on in this film, like it feels rushed, and we meet all these characters, and I feel like they're so underdeveloped, and the movie for me just lacks so much emotion. If I could get your opinion on this movie.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I kept on asking myself, even by the trailers, Damien Chazelle is coming off of La La Land. He has so much clout. Anything he touches is going to have tons of attention on it. And he chooses this story. Like, I just kept on asking myself, why does this story matter now, besides the fact that it's an anniversary year for the landing on the moon? And the movie did not answer that question for me. And we've had so many great movies this year that have tapped into so much that's going on in our society, and to have another movie about a guy landing on a moon who has like an emotional wound, it was just like it didn't when I saw it didn't answer that question for me, like why we needed this. Yeah, I do agree it was technically wonderful. And I think for Damien Chazelle, it's a good move to show that he can do the big blockbuster, but I just don't think for the rest of us it's a good move.
No, I mean, and I have said this, and I will happily keep going on record and saying this. Damien Chazelle has made the same movie 3 times now. Oh. This is the same movie about a guy who has a passion, and everything else gets put to the side, and I want to focus on my passion, screw everything else. And I mean, this movie, like, he has, I know someone contacted my wife and said, that was how Neil Armstrong was, but this is a movie, and if you have actors like Claire Foy, who's an amazing actress, you need to give her something to do. And there is this disconnect throughout the movie with every single character. It's not just Claire Foy. He has kids, and the kids are just kind of ignored. And then I don't even want to talk about the ending. That ending, how like studio.
Don't spoil it. Then he gets to the moon.
No, studio full of
You mean when he burns the American flag?
yeah, that's it. Where he burns the American flag on the moon. Yeah. Sorry, I'm glad you're on the same page with me.
Yeah.
But just going off another thing that you said is Olivia Colman. I should be the front runner right now. I think she was incredible. I mean, that movie's a lot to take in. And the runtime of that and the pacing of that was not something that I enjoyed in terms of the pacing. But I will say that the performances in that film are incredible. The weakest performance, which is not a weak performance at all, is Rachel Weisz, just because we've seen her do this role before. But seeing Emma Stone in a whole new light, but Olivia Colman is just captivating in this movie, and she owns it. The other movie that I did want to kind of give some love to, which I think because it's a couple months out, that I absolutely adored and should be nominated for this category, is Nicole Kidman in Boy Erased. I will also go on record and say that I am more of a Lucas Hedges fan than a Timothée Chalamet fan. I know it's very, very bad to say in the critics group because they love that Timothée Chalamet, but I'm more of a Lucas Hedges fan. And I saw this movie, and Nicole Kidman's performance in this is just delightful. It's so layered. There's, she's playing the wife who, finds out that her son is, gay. And then, she's married to a pastor, and she has to struggle between the two. Like, she loves her son. Does she want to try to understand where he's coming from? Does she stand behind her husband and his belief system, and doing the politics scene and the religious stuff and how people view them in this neighborhood? Again, very powerful stuff. It showcases the joy that a parent can have while trying to understand their kid, but also the heartbreak that comes along with it and dealing with something like this that, amazingly in 2018 is we still struggle with, which is just unbelievable at this point. And the fact that this movie talks about gay conversion therapy and the practices that go on with that are just...
Somebody really needs to make a movie about PFLAG.
Yeah.
Parents and friends of lesbians and gays.
Yeah. I don't know. Any last minute, any additional things you want to throw in here for best supporting before we go?
No, I just wanted to point out, you used the term frontrunner, and it's funny to me that going into this award season, we haven't been called the frontrunner, and I can't wait for the headlines.
Oh, yeah. So that's it for this episode.
No.
No. You have something to say?
We're out. So.
We're out. Oh, but you can say it. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to give a plug to a movie showing up on Hulu next week, which I thought was really entertaining and great, called The Body, which is showing up on Hulu's new horror anthology franchise, Into the Dark. But it's a full feature. It's not an hour. It's a full-length feature. And I really enjoyed that, so I wanted to give that a plug.
Also, what's interesting about that is that they're releasing one episode or feature episode per month for a whole year. So it's 12 features throughout the whole year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a new
That's great.
take on like releasing a show like this. It's kind of like Creep Show, but if it was one per month,
Wow. Yeah. I did not know that. I gotta bring you on more often. You're introducing me to a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know.
I'm loving it.
Yeah, I'm loving it too. So real quickly, just to wrap it up, we'll start with you, Abbie, and then work their way back. Just where they can find you and read your stuff or whatever you want to promote. Go for it.
I write for assignmentx.com on an almost daily basis. Check out my Amazon authors page for the books I've done. And on Twitter, I'm at Hedgebeast. That's hedge like a shrubbery, beast like an animal. Hedgebeast.
You can find my reviews and my podcasts at battleshippretension.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Davey Pretension, which is mostly plugs of my reviews and hockey thoughts. So that's at Davey Pretension.
You can find my stuff at The Hollywood Reporter. I'm writing there almost every day. And then at my Twitter handle, at Katie Kilkenny7, because there are so many of us.
And I am Scott Menzel. You can find all my written reviews and interviews at weliveentertainment.com. And until next week, we will see you soon. Take care. Bye.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network. The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.